The echo in the Ember Room. The chill of the old museum settled deep into Arthur's bones, a dampness that had nothing to do with the outside rain and everything to do with the weighty silence of the Forgotten Legacies exhibit. He clutched his worn sketchbook tighter, its cover softened by years of use, and avoided the gaze of the lone guard at the far end of the hall. Arthur understood the guard's presence. A man with a tweed jacket and an intense stare wasn't a common sight in a quiet Tuesday afternoon gallery. But still, the urge to plead, "Just a moment, please, let me breathe," was a constant battle beneath his calm exterior. He had travelled 300 miles for this. Not to a bustling city gallery with renowned masterpieces, but to this tucked-away municipal museum, famous only among a niche group of art historians and the genuinely eccentric. His pilgrimage wasn't for a celebrated masterwork, but for a single, unassuming portrait titled The Ember-Eyed Seamstress. It hung in a dimly lit alcove, bathed in the muted glow of a single overhead spotlight, making its reds and oranges pulse with a deceptive warmth. On the long train ride here, Arthur had tried to prepare himself. He'd closed his eyes against the fleeting glimpses of grey countryside, attempting to conjure the painting in his mind. He envisioned its texture, the slight warp of the canvas, the particular shade of scarlet in the woman's threadbare shawl. He wanted to walk into the museum, fix his gaze, and then approach, slowly, until he was close enough to whisper to the figure, "Did you know?" It was a delusion, he knew. A fantastical notion born from grief and unanswered questions. The woman in the painting, with her knowing half-smile and eyes that seemed to hold the dying light of a distant fire, had no answers. She was just oil on canvas, painted over a century ago, and like his grandmother, long gone. Yet Arthur clung to the possibility, the irrational belief that some truth, some fragment of understanding, could be gleaned from those brushstrokes. The guard's persistent presence meant he couldn't get as close as he wished. No hushed whispers, no intimate inspection of the cracks in the varnish. He would have to seek his answers from a distance. No matter. Even from across the polished floor, the painting's energy was potent. The seamstress sat upright, her thin body poised on a stool, hands resting in her lap as if paused mid-stitch. Her gaze, however, was what truly held him. It was unsettling, filled with an ancient weariness, yet simultaneously vibrant with a hidden ember. It was a look that demanded an unspoken question, an answer without compassion or remorse. A question that had haunted Arthur for 3 years. She knew it was coming, didn't she? He scanned the surface, noting the small, faded signature in the bottom right corner. A. Caldwell, 1908. More than a century old. A life rendered in pigments, long since past. The sad, inescapable truth of a moment frozen in time. Would it help, Arthur, if I told you the question is unanswerable? Would you believe me if I told you that? The thought echoed in his mind, in his grandmother's voice. How about if I told you I should have kept it to myself? It was just a casual observation, Arthur. No need to read so much into it. Yes, she should have told him that. Then he would not have been left with an uncertainty that had taken him from hushed conversations in his grandmother's study to this quiet museum in the rain. But how could she have known? We utter words without thinking, never imagining the questions they can leave in their wake, and brushstrokes, too, can be applied to a canvas with the same casual abandon. These are ideas of the moment, that is all. Oh, but that's not you, is it, Arthur? You are always looking for a meaning, even when there is none to be found. But let me tell you something. Sometimes things happen for no reason. Fate, inescapability, intuition. Whatever it was enough to bring him here to the Ember Room. A distance also measured in years. He stared again at the date scrawled in the lower corner, 1908, and had to reproach himself. No, nothing was known then. Whatever he imagined he saw there, a question in the slight tilt of her head, a provocation in the lift of her chin, a defiant fatalism in the pout of those lips, a brutal honesty in those fathomless eyes. It was simply an interpretation, the very meaning of art. Make of me what you will, that is what she was saying. And for the first time, it occurred to Arthur that perhaps he had travelled here for nothing, that he had come here looking for something that could never be found. Then just enjoy the painting for what it is. That's good advice, Arthur. Do you hear me? He had read someplace, God knows where, that the specific pattern of embroidery on her collar symbolized hidden messages. When used in a portrait, it was meant to confer the wish for secrets to remain buried. And here it came again. Only this time it was not his grandmother's voice he heard, nor his own inner monologue, but a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to emanate from the canvas itself. You see, I did know, I always knew, and it was true, of course it was, he saw it now. As soon as he'd sat down on the bench, he'd tried to push it away, the foreboding. It wasn't in anything specific. It ran through all of it, every line, every brushstroke. Yes, it was in the tilt of the head, the pout of the lips, the merciless stare, in that strange, almost claustrophobic cropping of her body and the intensity of her gaze. She wanted him to see. She wanted him to ask her, "Did you know what was coming?" Always the quiet provocateur. The security guard shifted his weight, and Arthur felt him draw closer, became aware of his uniformed shape in his field of vision, and tried to ignore it. But the longer he sat there, the more agitated he became, his own energy filling the silent room, focusing the guard's attention like a magnet. Arthur turned and nodded to him, hoping that if he acknowledged his presence, the guard would walk away. Would see he meant no harm. He was not here to damage or destroy. He simply had a question. But the guard had been trained to remain impassive, to hold Arthur's gaze in a way that left no doubt. If Arthur spoke German, he would ask him, "Hab ich zu lange hier gesessen? Have I been sitting here too long?" His tone passive, apologetic, asking for permission. He would charm him with politeness, and the guard would leave him be. But Arthur was useless here, wordless and powerless. So he averted his eyes and looked down at his lap for a moment, noticing the faint tea stain on his trouser leg, remembering the rush that morning as he dashed from the guest house. It no longer felt like the same day, but when he looked at his watch, he saw it was just past 11. He'd been sitting there for barely 45 minutes, and still he had not told her about Evelyn. Still he had not whispered her name to the painting. Evelyn, that's what this was really about, wasn't it? This lonely journey of his. That's the real question. He wanted to know what she felt. Did she know it was coming? Tell me, did Evelyn know just as you knew? Did she feel the same dread? This century-dead woman. She was the link between them, between the now and then, between knowing and not knowing, but only because this was what he had made of her. That day in Paris. What was it, 4 years ago now? He and Evelyn wandering the Louvre, trying to make sense of it all. They had stopped before a lesser-known Renaissance portrait, a woman with an unnervingly serene smile, and Evelyn had been unable to control her laughter, something about the pose, the stiff, almost uncomfortable posture, the ornate collar that seemed to swallow her neck, all of it so comically rigid, her smile, bemused, almost meek, like a child's, the strange, unflinching, dehumanizing aspect of it. Poor Lady Alara. To have posed for a man such as him. The gallery had been playful, almost cruel, and had placed a vibrant, almost chaotic Baroque painting of a battle scene alongside her. Soldiers writhing in agony, their dramatic contortions a stark contrast to the blank and bewildered stare of Lady Alara. Evelyn had gasped at the audacity of it, and had looked to Arthur for some sort of explanation. He said it was his duty to history to capture what he saw, no matter how unsettling. Arthur had quoted from a museum plaque he'd read earlier, and he had felt his throat contract, only understanding when he continued. He wrote that in a diary entry before he painted Lady Alara. And Evelyn had stared at the painting and replied, "Who would do such a thing? Paint such rigidity beside such chaos?" When Arthur blinked uncomprehendingly, she moved away from him, pausing only briefly at the adjacent collection of abstract works, too unnerved then to meet his eye, because she was no longer sure where the boundary of artistic intention and deliberate irony lay. But he'd admit her honesty intrigued him as much as her sudden discomfort repelled him. He had mistaken her question for a judgment of the art and had pushed the point. "The truth that came from it, surely you can admire that." Evelyn did not understand at first and stumbled on an answer. "Oh no, that's not it. It's not the truth, it's—" Then, "You can see it in her eyes, don't you think? Something's there. A quiet despair and an acceptance. It's true. Look." And Arthur had started to explain again. "Well, the historical context, you see, during that period." But she had interrupted. "No, look closely. You can see it." She knew what was coming, didn't she? Perhaps that's why she holds herself with such a strange stillness. Then she had walked away, because some truth had been spoken and there was no coming back from it. And yes, maybe it's a lie when Arthur says his words had no intentions, no meaning, no forethought. Maybe the truth is, he saw something there that no one should ever know. She had spoken to him with an honesty he was not prepared to hear and was not prepared to accept. He'd caught a glimpse of the future right there in this woman's past, and he walked away. What else could he have done? No one wants to know their own future. That day in Paris, Evelyn had stared for a long time at that Baroque battle painting, the naked bodies sitting on the foreground, exposed and taut and willful, those astonishing, pain-filled eyes filled with defiance. And Arthur knew she tried so hard to find it there, despair and acceptance. Which was it? She wasn't sure. Not fate, though. She thought he was wrong about that and had left the museum feeling burdened and uncertain. It was only 3 days ago that Arthur had finally understood. Despair and acceptance, one and the same thing. She had understood it, and in its expression had shown him something he feared. He remembered Evelyn staring at Lady Alara. 2 women, their eyes locking, both of them withholding something. He had remembered her face when she turned to him, her perplexed expression. Who would do such a thing? The memory flowing seamlessly into the new reality. The new question, one just as unanswerable as the first. Did she know it was coming? There had been no time, in the end, to answer that. But he had hung a faded photograph of Evelyn in the darkness of his study to keep the grief at bay, not understanding he had confronted fate on the wall of a museum. Despair or acceptance? Is that how he saw it? Then, in that case, he had no answer. He could not help himself, and, in truth, neither could she. She was just a woman, just a spirit, here for the briefest of moments, as they all are. But he could watch her, sitting alone in the Ember Room, his pilgrimage almost complete now. An answer of sorts to be found here after all. The seamstress. She had been asking for understanding, Arthur was sure of it. The subtle glow in her eyes, some unspoken plea for recognition, though not forgiveness, that she did not need. And that is what her gaze meant. She knew what was coming her way, and so she sat there, poised, and then waited for it to come. Her eyes ready, waiting to receive the answer. Because we all have to answer it ourselves in the end, despair or acceptance. We can only wait and listen, tilt our heads and lift our chins as if to say, "Go on then. Tell me." 1908, and all of this was still to come. Evelyn's laughter. The painted soldier, lost on some forgotten battlefield. And then all those millions of others. She was simply one of them. And now, so was he. And the question, did you feel it coming? Arthur dared to say it out loud now, no need to whisper, and the sound of his voice in the sudden silence of the museum sent the guards scurrying across the room, ready, poised, waiting for an answer. "What did you say, sir?" And Arthur looked at him and found a word at last. "Entschuldigung, Entschuldigung," he whispered, as he rose from the bench and walked away. And what he meant by that was acceptance.
That's it, folks. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of English, please subscribe to English Tale Box for more captivating narratives and language insights. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves a good story or is learning English. Thank you for watching.